I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2022 Porsche Macan. The 2022 facelift of the Macan actually goes quite a bit further than skin deep. As we'll see when we jump into Porsche's luxury mid-size SUV, the interior has had a big spruce up, but it's actually what's under the bonnet of this beautiful Gentian blue Macan S that makes the biggest difference for 2022. And that's because if there was something to improve over the outgoing version of the Macan, it was the 3-litre petrol V6. It was good, but not great. What was great was the 2.9-litre twin-turbo V6 found under the bonnet of the previous Macan Turbo, and also vehicles like the Audi RS4 and RS5. Well, the 2.9 is now under the bonnet of the Macan S as well. The 3-litre V6 has been completely nixed from the Macan lineup. It's now a choice only between a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder base model, just called the Macan, and then the 2.9 in the Macan S and the Macan GTS that sits above this specification as the current top of the range. And that's because the Macan Turbo has actually been discontinued for now. That's because in 2023, the Macan will spawn a fully electric version that will effectively take the place of the outgoing Turbo at the top of the range. Interestingly, the electric Macan will be a completely different car to this, sitting on an entirely separate platform, the PPE platform shared with the Taycan. For now though, what we have is this heavily revised MLB-based combustion Macan with the 2.9-litre petrol engine. And in today's video, I'm going to take you through all of our usual steps. We'll have a look inside this quite tastefully specified Macan S, we'll check out the backseat and the boot space, discuss the running costs of this Porsche SUV, and then head out onto the road to see whether this continues to be a benchmark in the luxury mid-size crossover segment here in Australia. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe down below the video and the notification bell. Jumping into the interior of the Porsche Macan, and you find a high quality cabin which really makes you feel like you are here to do some driving. But that's particularly the case if you carefully select a specification in here built around these 18-way seats. Now these are actually one of the best value options on the Macan. 14-way seats are standard, but the bolsters are much smaller. So if you are somebody of a larger frame, the 14-way seats may well suit. But if you are of a narrower frame, like your erstwhile reviewer today, the 18-way seats are just spectacular. The bolsters are quite tall and they are on both the backrest and on the squab, and they're fully adjustable. So when you're getting in the car, you can really tighten them and the car just completely holds you in. And as well as the high level of mechanical and chemical grip in this car, the seats also do a phenomenal job of just helping you stick the line in a corner without sort of flopping about the cabin like you do in so many of this car's rivals, which are under bolstered in terms of their seats. These are fantastic seats. What I would do differently in this car is, instead of spending $6,000 on this black leather package with blue stitching, I would spend that same $6,000 on this high quality leather, but in a lighter color. This is a very rainy day, unfortunately. That's La Nina in Sydney, but it doesn't help that we're sitting in black leather with a black steering wheel, a black dashboard, and a black headliner. It all feels a little depressing in here, which is a shame because the actual interior design of the Macan is quite lovely. It's not overstyled, it's classy, it's understated. I really like it. Now, if you go for the Macan S, the standard trim is aluminium, which is fitted to this car, and that looks quite Teutonic and quite smart and handsome. But you can go for carbon fiber if that's your sort of thing. You can go for more leather where the aluminium is, or you can even do something a little bit more old school like burr walnut, which you can even put on the steering wheel. And then all of a sudden we're talking about a Tom spec on this car. Anyway, the black leather steering wheel feels really good. We've got real metal paddle shifters for the 7-speed dual clutch automatic. We've also got this restyled automatic gear shifter down here. I think that it's a bit of a shame it's just got sort of hard, scratchy plastic underneath it though. A leather boot would have been nicer. I even think that new Taycan and 911 sort of little fob shifter thing actually feels a bit more expensive than this, but that's a personal thing. But down here, this is the main change for the Macan's interior for 2022. The button fest has kind of been eliminated. The buttons are still there, it's just that they are now sort of haptic touch controls where you need to sort of give it a hard stab. Now the backing is piano black and you do see quite a lot of fingerprints on that. Here in the center though, we have a large, crisp widescreen, fully touch capable, lots of processing power behind it, wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, that's standard, and the built-in navigation graphics look really good. Now, standard speakers is a 12-speaker unit, but you can option up a Bose surround sound system, which is good if not great. I think it sounds okay. It's just not as immersive as the Bowers & Wilkins that you'd get on a Volvo XC60 at this particular level, and I actually think the Bang & Olufsen in the Audi SQ5 is better too, but it does the job. Now up here, we've got a leather dash, blue stitching, that's part of that $6,000 leather package. Looks nice. Soft touch materials on the doors, not leather, just soft plastic, and practicality is decent. 2 cup holders here, a sliding armrest that hides a reasonable box with USB ports, bit of incidental storage here, and big door bins that'll take a water bottle too. And lastly, in front of you, you've still got 2 handsome analog gauges and a very cool digital screen in color for your map, trip computer, media options, etc. Here in the back seat of the Macan S, you find a space that certainly isn't the largest in the class, but it's actually not trying to be. The Macan S is relatively compact for a mid-size SUV, the wheelbase is relatively short, and that's all about trying to give this vehicle handling which is more like that of a hot hatch than of a big family bus. So what you can see is, for myself at 6 foot, it's perfectly livable. Headroom, I've got ½ an inch underneath the panoramic sunroof. Legroom, I've got a few inches, and tow room is actually okay, even with the driver's seat on the deck. Getting someone to the center would be a big ask. The seats are perch and there's a huge hump in the floor, but for 4 adults, this is going to work. And by avoiding having cavernous legroom where it's not necessary, this car handles better. And that isn't a line spouted out of the Macan brochure, it's just a fact, as you'll see when we take this vehicle out onto the road. In terms of amenities back here, we've got air vents, we've got a separate temperature control, 2 USB-C ports, soft materials back here, and a flip-down armrest with 2.5 cup holders and a pass-through to the boot. If you like skiing or that sort of thing, this would be a pretty sweet chariot for a ride like that. And the seat's comfy too, because the base is actually inclined upwards, so it supports your legs on long drives. Moving around here to the back of the facelifted Macan, and it looks quite similar to the 2021 version that it replaced, particularly from this end. Most of the visual changes for this running update to the vehicle are at the front, where it sort of wears that more prominent mask aesthetic, particularly on the GTS version where that's all blacked out. But this S is most certainly not a GTS. It's a very elegant specification. Gentian blue is the color on this car. This one has the aluminium window surrounds. I think it looks luxurious, classy. You don't have to go blacked out or gray on black. You can do something a bit more interesting like this. And in actual fact, you can do paint to sample. You can really take a Macan as far as you want to. It's not seen anywhere near as much as it is on Porsche's sports cars like the 911 or the 718, but you can basically get whatever color you want on this vehicle if you're willing to pay for it. We do have this lit Heck Blender reflector here on the back, which is cool. We've got Macan S lettering here, but you can delete that if you want to. And the S is marked out by its very prominent silver quad tailpipes. If you want a sports exhaust system, you can do that too, and that switches the color of the pipes to black. Now, we've got a release button here for the power tailgate, which is standard, and that opens up to reveal a 453-litre boot. It's a big square shape. It isn't the biggest in the segment, nor is the Macan the biggest vehicle in the luxury mid-size segment, which is one of the reasons it's good to drive. Underneath the boot floor, you've got a very much collapsible spare wheel. In the boot itself, we've got 4 tie-down points, got a nice sturdy cargo cover. And up here, we have the ability to close the boot or to close it and lock it. And all of that happens without so much as a sound, which is very nice compared to some of this vehicle's beeping rivals. So with the practicality out of the way, let's talk about our last point before we head onto the road, which is the running costs of this Macan S. So what's it going to cost you to run a Porsche Macan S? Well, it's going to cost you more than something like an Audi Q5, which is also a premium SUV, similar size, based on the same MLB platform, but really rather different to drive. The main reason for those higher running costs is because Porsche doesn't have cap price servicing, unlike almost every other manufacturer in Australia, and the service pricing does differ by dealership. So for instance, the dealer closest to our Chasing Cars office in Sydney, Porsche Centre, Sydney South, will charge you $4,830 at current pricing to service the Macan for 5 years and 75,000 kilometres. In terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,368 to comprehensively insure a new Porsche Macan. Of course, everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage the car, your driving history, etc. In terms of fuel consumption, the 2.9 in Macan S, guys, is rated to consume 10.2 litres per 100 kilometres on the ADR cycle. In our testing today, we were driving pretty hard and I managed about 13 litres per 100. So it's certainly not the most frugal SUV in its class, but you are getting a whole bunch of performance out of this vehicle. So it kind of all balances out, I reckon. And in terms of warranty, there's a 3-year warranty on Porsches in Australia, but for an extra cost, you can actually extend the warranty on this vehicle all the way out to 15 years if you wanted to. So what is the 2022 Macan like to drive? Well, I've kind of got perfect weather for this car. As Porsches go, one of these is kind of what you want on a really grey, rainy, fairly horrible day out here in the New South Wales countryside, because everything kind of gets a chance to shine. The fact it rides a little bit higher, the fact it's got a very active all-wheel drive system, and of course the fact that we have plenty of power, particularly if you go for one of the 2.9 litre variants in this car, because there are differences in how powerful and how torquey they are, even though they share the same base engine. The GTS that sits at the top of the range and is about 25 grand more expensive than the S has the most power, 324 kilowatts of it and 550 newton meters of torque. But the Macan S is no slouch and actually has quite a nice balanced output, 280 kilowatts and 520 newton meters of torque. Either way, they're both a considerable step up from the base Macan, which has a 2-litre Group E888 turbo petrol 4-cylinder, making 195 kilowatts of power and 400 newton meters of torque. Now, the base car isn't slow, but after driving it first, which I did today, always good to start in the entry-level vehicle and work your way up, I find. Starting in that car, it certainly feels like a premium SUV, but at 85 grand, it's definitely not cheap, and I think it starts to make the $105,000 Macan S actually look like reasonably good value. And hold up before you throw chat at me in the comments for being out of touch and saying 105,000 is good value. I don't mean it's affordable to everybody. What I mean is, in the context of a sports SUV, the Macan S is pretty darn talented for a $105,000 vehicle. Again, in complete fairness, this car is optioned up to $130,000, but a number of those options are cosmetic and are things that you may or may not desire in a car. $4,500 21-inch wheels, for instance, might not be at the top of your list. This car also has options on it, like a $3,000 panoramic sunroof, the Bose stereo, all things which are sort of take it or leave it, although in a lot of ways they are an expectation in a luxury SUV too. But with the Macan S, it's actually all about the ride and handling of this vehicle that has always set it apart, but now it also has the added benefit of the 2.9 litre engine being available at a much lower price point than it was before in the previous year's Macan Turbo. And this engine is just an absolute delight. It has a fantastic sound to it. It is one of the best sounding engines of the modern era when, we don't have too many V8s being developed. Instead, we're sort of quite reliant on V6s now and 6-cylinder engines for performance. And thankfully, Porsche have crafted an absolutely sonorous engine and exhaust in this car. It is shared with Audi, and it's also an engine we really like in the RS4 and the RS5. But here in the Macan, it just feels right at home. And you could get it in the outgoing turbo, but in actual fact, it's just a delight in the S, which is a little softer, a little more plush, quite a bit more compliant than the new GTS, and it just, it's just a beautifully lush engine in effectively a luxury spec SUV like this. Really quite delightful and well matched to the 7-speed PDK transmission as well, the Porsche dual clutch, which is just a great gearbox, pretty much the benchmark for what you'd want from an automatic. This is it. You do have paddles here to drive it through if you want to, but good luck to you if you can outsmart the PDK, which just has a sixth sense and intuition for what the right gear to be in is at any particular given time. I know that's an oft-repeated cliche, but in the case of this car, it's very much true. Now, the 2-litre engine at the bottom of the range is adequate. It has enough power and torque to move this car, and again, the 7-speed PDK is a really good fit, but it's not super special. I'm not sure how Porsche it is. That's an engine used right throughout the Volkswagen group, and it's a bloody good foundation engine, but when you step from the Macan to the Macan S, you're getting much more than a 20 grand step up in terms of overall balance, in terms of pace, and just how this car really feels like the genuine item. Looking at the Porsche badge shining up at you from the steering wheel here, the S is where that starts to really feel totally legit, in my opinion. And if I was going to spend money on anything when buying a Macan, I would ditch the black crap and huge wheels, and instead I'd put that money into buying the 2.9 V6 instead of the 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder. That's just my 2 cents on powertrain. Any of these cars handle really well. The steering is pretty feelsome for a mid-size SUV. It's right up there in this segment, which is usually a fairly isolated car from a driver's perspective. The Macan manages to be communicative. You actually can feel the road surface through the power steering rack, which is something Porsche has managed to do with electric power steering that not many others have. And the turn-in is excellent. It's best in the 4-cylinder, although on the standard 19-inch wheels, there is a bit of doughiness to the 4-pot on initial turn-in, as you have to roll through a high-profile tyre. On these optional 21s, the V6 turns in super well, and yet it's still compliant, because when you go for the Macan S, you go from passive dampers to the Porsche active suspension management system with adaptive dampers and a better anti-roll bar setup, which means that it is at once more controlled and more compliant. The ride is noticeably less fidgety in either of the 2.9 litre cars compared to the base Macan with the 2 litre and just passive dampers, steel springs. So it's really, the ride is good. The GTS steps up to standard air suspension, but you actually don't need it. The ride quality feels very similar between the Macan S with PASM and the Macan GTS with air. The handling is best in the V6 cars, where they have loads of torque available underfoot to really bring the rear around very actively, more actively than in almost any other midsize SUV. You can get into that loud pedal and really adjust your line in the corner with the throttle. It's not afraid to send the vast majority of the 520 Newton meters of torque backwards, and power oversteer is absolutely there for the taking. There is an ESC Sport mode, which makes it easier to find, but even in ESC completely on, you really can trim your line on throttle nicely. So it turns in well, it throttle steers really well, and while there is some body roll, it's nothing major. It's really well contained, more contained than almost any other vehicle in this segment, I would say. And it actually works to the car's advantage, because you can sort of play with the balance of the chassis really well. It's not sort of just super flat for flatness' sake, which often generates a fair bit of understeer if it won't roll at all in a corner. It's just a really nicely tuned setup and chassis in this car. And that's probably the biggest difference between Macan and the Q5. Well, the Q5 is a really nicely balanced luxury SUV as well. It just doesn't strike anywhere near the highs in terms of the dynamic balance of this car. And in terms of the communication from the control surfaces to the driver, this is just right up there. It feels, bespoke for a luxury SUV. Ironic, given this is easily Porsche's most popular car here in Australia, but it feels genuinely special, but particularly if you go for the Macan S or the Macan GTS, which is absolutely what I would do. Well, I would go for the S. A few things to look out for. AEB is not standard on this car, which is unacceptable in a luxury SUV. You have to tick the circa $1,600 adaptive cruise control package, which adds in the requisite radar system that makes AEB work. That's something Porsche really should have rectified for this facelift, and is likely to be not the case on the PPE version, but we'll see. Not having AEB when a base model Toyota Yaris does is hard to accept. What we do have is lane keep assist. That works quite well, keeps the car nicely tracking in its line. We have blind spot monitoring. We have a good camera system, 360 degree camera, makes this SUV easy to park. It's quite easy to see out of. The view forward is good. The mirrors are nice and big and have that beautiful characteristic Porsche oval shape, and the view out the back is okay. It's a little bit impeded by the headrests, I must say, but it's nothing that you can't deal with. And view over your shoulder into the blind spot is okay too. So those are my first impressions of the 2022 Porsche Macan facelift. I've concentrated on the S today, but I plan to do some deep dives into the other models in the range, particularly the 4-cylinder base model, which is a really important vehicle, Porsche says, for getting people in the door to buy their first car from this brand. From my first impressions today, driving all three vehicles back to back here in Sydney though, the S is an absolute peach. It's the pick of the range, both in terms of driving dynamics, which strike a near perfect balance in this segment between comfort, compliance, and control, but also in terms of value for money. I don't think you need to spend more on the GTS to get the best Macan experience. Of course, when the all-new electric version of this car, based on the PPE platform, turns up, that will add a whole other dimension to the mix that we'll need to talk about later on. But for the next year at least, this is the Macan to go for, I think. Keen to know your view? Let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.